Hi, I'm Sarah Cowgill. Joining me today are Graham Noble, Dave Patterson, John Clark, and Michelle White. And this is the Conservative Five, Liberty Nation's online TV news program. Another week of now, nothing's going to come of it, but hey, watch this, is underway as the Trump Department of Justice has launched an investigation into the very manly Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and his sidekick, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, for a variety of legal issues. Although Trump has backpedaled on invoking the Insurrection Act, plenty of crazy ICE and illegal alien action in Minnesota to discuss. Let's get to it, my fine feathered friends. All right, Michelle, the optics, and I don't even know how else to state this, but the optics on the ICE raids, can the Democratic Party keep whining about it until the next midterms without any kind of success or with any kind of success?
I don't think so, but I think that's their goal, is they're pushing for an all-out, defund the ICE movement. And I don't think I know Americans are not behind them because they've been successful. And so they're just upping the ante. I think what happened on Sunday, though, may have crossed the line for a lot of people because whether they are religious or have a faith or not, they do view a church service as a sacred space. So when they're taking their protests into a private church service and children are crying and people are fearful, I think they lost their message. I hope they lost their message anyway, and I hope that people remember that. But that's their goal, is to make people hate ICE, move to defund ICE, and keep that drum going until the midterms. But I think it's going to backfire. I hope it's going to backfire because they're all, the DOJ going there is going to uncover all of that, the fraud that has been going on for years that they're now going after. They should have investigated that years ago, how much Tim Walz knew about it, how much he looked the other way, but then also how much they're involved in stoking the fire of all this anger for enforcing the law. I think that's why President Trump came to the presser yesterday and was showing these mugshots of some of the most horrendous offenders that ICE is taking off the streets.
24 times convicted.
I can't imagine anyone who would support keeping them. One had 24 convictions. There was one that he read off that had ties to Hezbollah. Many of them were murderers. We can't forget Laken Riley and Jocelyn Nungare and all the other girls who were raped and murdered brutally at the hands of illegal aliens. So ICE is getting the bad rap, and I think he's trying to turn the message around because the media is not doing it. The media is not reporting the good news of ICE. They're only reporting the bad.
The media, the mainstream media is not even reporting on what happened Sunday.
Right.
Really.
Right. Right. And I read a story this morning in the Washington Examiner where some of the reporters were complaining about his presser yesterday. Oh, you don't want to see mugshots of murderers who are now behind bars? You don't want to hear about the people that we got off the street? Should we release them to your neighborhood? I just couldn't understand how anybody would be complaining about that. But they were making snide comments. But their job is to take that information, and he shouldn't have to come out and give a presser specifically on that.
I don't know enough about the Insurrection Act, and I don't even want to go down that road. So, Dave, was it a smart move for Trump to ease off of those?
Yeah, I think so. I think that he has exercised the appropriate amount of restraint, not to deploy active duty or National Guard troops to deal with the rioting in Minneapolis. I think that is that was a smart move because, quite frankly, when you do that, the first thing that the media does is to make comparisons between the uniformed military in Minneapolis, for example, and what has gone on in Iran, or, pick your favorite really bad country. And they try to make a comparison between the two, and they don't recognize the nuances of law enforcement versus brutality. As I said, the undisciplined media hype would cause the public believe that the Insurrection Act is unprecedented, but the fact is it's not. We've talked about this on previous programs. 13 presidents have invoked the Insurrection Act, and that's including the progressives, darling Woodrow Wilson, who put down a labor strike with troops, and of course Franklin Roosevelt, who quelled the veterans riot, which was really, you want to talk about brutal. So the unrest in Minneapolis has not reached the level of violence that I think would prompt sending troops. The number of ICE, Border Patrol, FBI, and other law enforcement personnel seems to be sufficient. And where the efforts, in my view, of the FBI and the Treasury Department should be is to find the source of the money that backstops the professional rioters and cut it off, and then you'd see how little enthusiasm there might be on the streets.
And Bessent has said he's going to do that. So,
yeah, he has. But it's one of those things. It's a ponderous process to do those kinds of things, and it's not easy. They don't wear professional rioter uniforms that say, yes, I support with my money professional rioters.
Well, there's that. I'm gonna pivot here over to Graham, because I want to know if somebody else sees what I see, and that is the absurdity of the white liberal willing to strap on almost an American-style suicide vest for an illegal alien that have committed crimes in our country, heinous or otherwise. They're willing to die for this. I don't get it. Does anybody get it?
Well, I would say, well, for a start, I don't believe that any of them are actually willing to die for it. But I think they've just they've so lost their minds, and they are so deep now within their own echo chambers, and suffering so horrendously from Trump derangement syndrome that they've just lost all touch with reality. And one thing I'll throw in here is that and if Malcolm X was alive today, I know that he would very much agree with me, is that the white, he would have said liberal, but these people aren't really liberals at all. I even hate that using that words, but for argument's sake right now, I'll use it. The white liberal is the worst. He said basically the white liberal was the worst enemy of the black man, and he was correct, and that is true today. And it's because they have such a God complex. They really do, these people. I don't know how else to describe it. They believe that they have the right to speak for every ethnic minority. And of course, they don't have any respect for those people. And that's the reason why they think they can speak for them, because they believe that these people, they are all too stupid and ignorant to ever stand up for themselves. So they need their white liberal saviors to stand up for them. And I think this God complex is like overtaken these people to the point that now that they've created their own moral standard, and they are at the very top of that moral standard. They're right up there at the very top. Everyone else is well, everyone else on the other side of the political spectrum is at the very bottom of it. They have so managed to dehumanize the people who don't agree with them that they actually believe that anything now is acceptable. And that's why, storming a church. Look, I don't have a religious bone in my body. I'm not saying I'm an atheist, but I'm just saying I'm not religious, never have been. But nevertheless, I was horrified by these people storming into a church of all places. To me, like it kind of, Dave has suggested that, we should be prudent in our approach to this. I can't help thinking of the 2,000 odd Americans who were hunted down by the FBI after January 6th and arrested and kept in appalling conditions and denied certain constitutional rights. And so for that reason, I say whatever the left is going to accuse us of, or accuse Trump of, or accuse the Republicans or whatever, or ICE, bring it on. I don't care. I say that, and I certainly hope this never happens, but I say that the first time, whether it's Minnesota or anyone else, the first time an ICE agent is killed by one of these protesters, I say send in everybody and start knocking heads and start rounding people up and throwing them in prison.
I agree. Totally agree. And I think you should do it now. I wouldn't wait for an ICE agent to get hurt or killed. I totally agree that the insurrection.
Well, that's actually a good point.
No, you kind of, I think what we're seeing is we're at a point where we're going to cross that line or not. And, Mr. Clark, even if the PR is bad now, and we're only going to see the other side of the narrative. So if it's bad now, how does the shooting of that young mother who tried to run an ICE agent off the road and her, I think it was her wife, was filming it all, which is ridiculous. But the bad PR is being associated with Trump. How does he get past that?
I think he ignores it. It's not even journalism. It's propaganda, whatever PR stands for. It's propaganda redo. They just keep pushing out the same false
Not
messaging.
what it stands for, Clark.
What's that? Yeah, no, it's not, but it should be, because I think more and more Americans are actually fleeing from the fraud of the mainstream media. This is not Walter Cronkite. And I have to say, I love being on this panel because this is a good example. Everyone had some really strong remarks here. And I agree with Michelle, and it actually riled me up about why Minneapolis is the front line. And by the way, Graham, I think Malcolm X said that the white liberal uses the black man as a political football. And I don't think they're going to get in the end zone. They can keep pushing all their PR they want, but I think they're actually just losing viewers as people can watch the actual footage. And I think Dave's right that restraint was right. I think that as a lawyer that the president he has set it up. He is well within the law for the Insurrection Act, but that would just feed that PR machine as, oh, look, he's a Nazi. Actually, he obeys the law. Actually, he's going to leave at the end of everything they say about him is false. And I'm just amazed at the capacity for human beings to believe complete falsehoods. And including with Renee Good, the mother who had abandoned her first two children, as far as I can see. And what does that have to do if you're a mother or have stuffy furry bears in your glove compartment? Because I practiced criminal law for years, and this entire system has transformed from a pro-protect victim to a pro-criminals are victims system. Funded with Soros and others. So I agree at some point, you can't allow this to go forward. Don Lemon, if he is not incarcerated, should at least be on probation, because when he sits there and says he has the right to peacefully protest in a church during a service, try doing it in a mosque. Right. And then maybe the liberals would find a way to spin that. This is, if you do not have the rule of law, you have anarchy. And Minneapolis,
in the address of his nearest mosque and see if he does something stupid.
I say, let's 1,000 of us, let's get the January 6th people and let's go to his house and explain to him that we have a right to peacefully protest and make him feel uncomfortable. And I think he would feel uncomfortable. And nobody has that right. And that's not government action. So, right. It's not protected by the First Amendment. Everything that's going on is a refutation of reality, truth, justice, and common sense. And I'm thinking that it's good PR, because the more they show their extremism, there's a new acronym, AWFUL. I think it's affluent, white, female, urban liberals.
Yes.
They're kind of like Malcolm X on steroids. And then they're mad that you call them awful while they call you a Nazi and a racist and a misogynist all day long. The hypocrisy has got to be moving people towards reality again, and economic growth and reversal of fentanyl deaths and border crossings. These are good things, and they will start having good effects. It's a saving of our country. And so Minneapolis is the front line, because ICE doesn't just represent rounding up illegal predators who have victims, by the way. As a criminal lawyer, I defended criminals that did horrible things. And you know what? I was aware of their victims. I met their victims. I read their statements. I watched them in court. And we are paying more attention to victimizing criminals than understanding that they are having victims. We hear about Renee Good, but what about that Ukrainian girl killed on a train? Where was the outrage? And I think most Americans get this, and they've lost family to fentanyl, and they're being spared more deaths now. So But ICE is also the front line for rounding up fraud, the theft of money. And it looks like more and more evidence suggests that the Somali community has been involved in illegal voting fraud. I know we're not supposed to talk about that, but it's a reality.
And yet you just did.
Bring in the evidence. I did, but bring in the evidence, bring in the jury, bring back the rule of law, and let's have some accountability and not try to put the president in jail for 17 counts of fraud that would never charge against anybody because he misstated his assets on a bank application. I mean, the contrast is becoming more and more difficult to evade.
Well, I think the single focal point, which is, of course, Donald Trump. And all of this can be laid at the feet of the symptoms of Trump derangement syndrome. There is virtually nothing that he could do. There is nothing that he is for that would basically appease any of these people. I mean, if he cured cancer and if he, cured world hunger, they'd say cancer is good for you and the world hunger is not so bad because people are too fat. So there is virtually nothing that he can do and sending in the law enforcement to deal with illegal aliens is another example. Obama basically deported 6,000 illegal aliens and nobody said a thing. And so you have to take into consideration what really motivates and prompts all of this anarchy. And it's not based on the merits of what's going on. It's purely we hate Trump.
Are they trying to go back to the 60s and be badass? Because they're really not. They're just a bunch of whiners. Anyway, we watch with wonder the antics, and yet we still don't act, and that worries me. And it's resulted in deadly consequences. And no, it all could have been avoided by Governor Walz and Mayor Frey just doing their jobs. I mean, I guess they didn't think the fiddle would ever stop playing. But I think maybe it's running out of speed. That's it for our Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform, YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble. We are on them all. As well, Liberty Nation News has its own Roku channel where you can see all of our TV productions. And stop by to see our new aggregate polling operation, The Public Square. I'm your host, Sarah Cowgill. Thanks for joining us today to get your fix of free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com.